Arseny's first marriage, which happened at a young age, and as it seemed at the time, a great love, broke up after a few years of existence. During this time, they managed to give birth to a son. Despite his rather young age, Senya loved his first wife with all his soul and experienced the breakup rather severely, but he did not interrupt relations with his child. On the contrary, tried to give him a maximum of his free time. After that, he had a lot of women. Almost all of them wanted to hear from Arseny's marriage proposal. But he did not say these words to anyone. Angry and disappointed, they left for the more expeditious men. Senya didn't mind. He was in no hurry to marry a second time, and none of them appealed to him as his constant companion. This was the case until he was 35 years old. He celebrated his anniversary in a fancy restaurant in a big way. He was visited by many guests. His business partners, old school friends, and relatives. Svetlana was the administrator in this restaurant, and all the holiday Arseniy could not take his eyes off her. He thought she was beautiful. When he asked for her number at the end of the evening, Sveta did not refuse. On the contrary, she showed a sincere interest in the grown man. His friends judged him for his strange choice. His girlfriend was clearly too young for Arseniy. Young girls were bad luck, no brains, no imagination. But they left Senya, who had lost his head in love. "You're jealous of me." With a satisfied grin, he replied. "You don't mind taking a young girl to bed with you either." Soon all this talk died down, because suddenly, all of a sudden, Arseniy proposed to Sveta. No one had the heart to say this about his wife. Time passed. Senya could not be happy about his young wife. It seemed to him that he was now in his happiest state. His business was booming, and his personal life was in full bloom. Sveta tried to please her husband, and at first she preferred not even to contradict his opinion. For a long time, of course, it did not last, and the character began to break out. But Arseniy was not at all embarrassed. This made his wife seem even more interesting and attractive. Their first big quarrel occurred in the 3rd year of marriage. After that, Sveta grabbed her purse and ran out of the apartment, returning only in the morning quite drunk. It was that year of their relationship that was filled with scandals, which made Arseniy terribly upset. To him, their relationship seemed perfect, and he honestly did not understand what suddenly happened. After another fight in the afternoon, he drove to work in a depressed state, thinking about what had happened. Just at that moment, his business partner Fedor called him and offered to meet him for lunch and to discuss some plans. "What are you're frowning today," said Fedor. He and Arseniy had just arrived at the cafe. Senya did not plan to talk about personal matters with his partner, but the words about his quarrel with his wife slipped out by themselves. Fedor listened silently and nodded, and then suddenly said, "Listen, is everything all right in bed?" Senya arched an eyebrow in surprise. Such questions from a stranger he did not expect. "Of course. Why do you ask? How is that relevant?" "My second wife acted like that when she was having an affair on the side with a young trainer. Thought I wouldn't know. But that's when our intimacy was completely gone. She was not interested in me." Arseniy thought about his partner's words. From this side of the quarrels with his wife, he had never looked. And for him this thought was a new side and unexplored. He had been running it around in his head all day, not understanding why Fedor's words had hurt him so much. He read some articles on the internet on the subject and learned how to recognize someone who was cheating. Senya began to watch Sveta. At first it seemed to him that nothing unusual was going on. His wife behaved the usual way, and in bed, everything was as usual. They did not stop quarreling. On the contrary, Arseniy began to notice a certain pattern to their quarrels. This was always preceded by his wife's suddenly worsening mood out of the blue, after which the subject of the quarrel would appear out of nowhere. And now the light is already hurriedly dressed, shouting at her husband that she hates him, slams the door and leaves for the night somewhere. To calm him down, the man hired a detective to follow Sveta and her movements for a while. Senya gave the detective the main task of tracing where his wife goes after quarrels and with whom. Arseniy himself tried to behave in his usual way with Sveta, not showing even the slightest sign of distrust. No matter what, he loved his wife and did not want a divorce. He had a perfect plan in his head for their life together, but infidelity was not part of it. They agreed to meet with the detective, his name was Mikhail, when he had enough information. Mikhail promised to call the customer, and from then on, every call that came into Arseniy's phone caused him to shiver and panic. Finally, Mikhail contacted him, and the men arranged to meet. Senya waited for the detective, sitting in his car outside one of the business centers. It seemed to him like the minutes were dragging on forever. Finally, the detective knocked quietly on the window and then sat down next to the driver in the front seat. "Hello. What did you find?" Senya immediately asked. He couldn't wait any longer. Mikhail was calm. He said hello to the customer and handed him a puffy envelope containing photographs and papers. He did his job every day. It didn't surprise him that people cheated and lied to each other. He was so used to it that he considered it a variant of the norm. The man began his story by showing pictures, saying what he had seen and what he could recognize. In some of the pictures, Sveta was surrounded by people Arseniy himself knew well, and her mother, her sister, her friends. Here she came to a beauty salon, and now to an expensive boutique. Everything so far looked as harmless as possible. Afterwards, Senya saw that Michael did manage to catch him and his wife as she was running away from home after an argument. Here, she came out of the driveway and got into the fully tinted SUV. Arseniy's spoon sucked under his spoon. Hardly any of Sveta's friends drove a car like that. It was impossible to see the driver's face. He never made it into the camera lens, but on some shots you can clearly see that it is a man. He and Sveta came to the club. There were photos of him holding his arms, below her waist, as if embracing her. And the woman was smiling embarrassedly. Senya paid Mikhail off and put everything he had brought him back in the envelope and rushed to Sveta's house to dot the I's and cross the T's. He knew that his wife had gone to see her friends and knew where they were meeting. When he arrived at the restaurant, he burst into the hall like an enraged beast. He was holding pictures of his wife and her lover. His wife noticed him at once. His face did not bode well. Her husband threw the pictures at her and shouted, "What have you been missing?" He spiced up his speech with curses against Sveta. Both she and her friends literally froze in the same position. There was silence in the restaurant, broken only by the soft background music. Arseniy swung his arm in the light, but didn't have time to do anything. A security guard swooped down on him from behind and held him down, pinning him down. The deceived husband felt broken and humiliated. That same day, Arseniy gathered up what belongings he could find of Sveta and put them outside near the garbage can. He was not the least bit sorry, even though he had bought all these things himself with his own money. He decided to talk to his wife only through a lawyer. Though the woman tried every way to beg his forgiveness, he was firm and fully confident in his decision. He knew from common acquaintances that his friends had turned their backs on Sveta after that incident at the restaurant, and that her lover had been unwilling to help her in her difficult situation. So the divorced woman had nothing to do but go back to her parents, and later her old job as a receptionist, because of his stupid desire to sit on two chairs at once the world has lost everything she had. The next story is even more interesting. It tells how the son brought his friend to his mother's house, who fell in love and seduced his mother. Soon, she would regret it very much. Thierry, despite her 45 years, boasted a gorgeous figure and a mop of red hair. She had 2 children, an older daughter, Rita, who had long lived apart, and a son, Wyra, a third-year student. With her husband, Justin, they had been together for many years, and the passion in their marriage had faded, giving way to mutual respect, affection, and love. Justin was 2 years older than his wife and had his own chain of bakeries in the area. The two of them built the business together with Terry. She always stood behind her husband and helped him make decisions for which he was now grateful. Perhaps without her, he would never have been able to reach these heights. Now they had everything they could ever want. Terry knew no rejection from her husband. He pampered her, allowing her to spend money on whatever she wished. Terry did not work. She tried several times to build her business separately from her husband, but quickly gave up and realized that she preferred being just a wife and mother. One day, Terry was in the kitchen when she heard the door to the apartment open. Ira and his friend Kosti showed up in the hallway. "What handsome boys have come to our house," she greeted them with a smile. "Mom." Byra was embarrassed. The boys went to their son's room to play computer games. A little later, out of the corner of her eye, Terry saw Kosti getting his shoes on. "Are you leaving already? Why isn't Ira seeing you off?" "Because Sveta called him there." Kosti laughed. "Come on, at least I'll see you off." The woman smiled. He got dressed and got ready to leave, but barely opened the door, he turned around and told Terry that she looked fine. She did not have time to respond before Kosti disappeared through the door. The woman was pleased by the compliment from the young man. She immediately felt a few years younger and more attractive. In the evening, her husband also noticed her elated mood and asked what had happened. Terry told Justin everything as it happened without a backward glance. He frowned and asked her not to have any more friends at their house, her son. "Are you jealous?" Terry asked in surprise. The husband nodded, and the conversation was over. This pleased Terry even more. So there is some powder in the powder box means that she can still make men look at her with lust. And even her husband, despite years of marriage. After Terry told her husband what Kosti had said, he called her more often during the day, asking how she was doing and if anyone had been to visit. At first she was flattered by Justin's behavior, but later it became annoying. And once they had a big fight over his desire to control his wife. "Have you gone senile or something?" She yelled at him in the heat of the argument. "No, I'm just trying to keep my wife from sin," Justin retorted. Terry took offense at him. She thought her husband was wrong to distrust her, but the thought of intimacy with Kosti stuck in her mind. "Kosti doesn't come by," she once said to her son casually. "Did you have a quarrel?" "No, he's working," Yura explained, "over a sandwich." "Yes, and says he fell in love. A girl of some kind." After these words, Terry got a little upset. For some reason, she felt like stomping her foot like little girls do and pouting her lips in resentment. After all, she honestly believed she liked Kosti. But maybe it was just her husband, who was very jealous of her, who put these thoughts in her head. One day, when Yura was at school and Justin was at work, a bell rang in their apartment. Going to the door and looking through the peephole, Terry was surprised to see Kosti there. "What are you doing here?" she asked, opening the door. He held out a bouquet of flowers to her in return. "I'm not taking it. Put it away." She pushed Kosti's hand away and was about to slam it. But the boy managed to put his foot in front of her and with his free hand, yanked the door open. Terry was taken aback by the insolence this boy allowed himself. She got angry at him and even wanted to push him in the shoulder, but did not have time. Kosti kissed her. He piled on top of her and his hands were already fumbling under her home shirt. Then, lying with Kosti on the couch and trying to regain her breath after her intimacy with him, she wondered how to tell him to get over it. Maybe pay him to threaten that she knew the rector of their university and could influence his expulsion. Thoughts swirled in her head. At that moment, Kosti turned to her and stroked her cheek. The touch was so soft and gentle that Terry involuntarily leaned toward the young man. "You are so beautiful," he whispered in her ear. Terry's insides quivered, and she rumbled with pleasure like a cat. As she saw Kosti off, she asked him not to come back. He nodded in agreement. The bouquet lay on the chest of drawers by the doorway until evening. Before her husband arrived, Terry threw it down the garbage chute. Costi failed to keep his promise and was standing on Terry's doorstep again a week later. Their meetings continued for several months. They relaxed so much that they stopped keeping everything under strict control, and one day they slipped up. Terry saw the children off in the morning and quickly ran to the shower to get dressed for her lover's arrival. After the doorbell rang, she rushed happily out of the shower, humming a melody from a movie. Costi, seeing her in a towel, got her started and dragged her to bed. They were so engrossed in the process that they didn't hear Justin come home. Justin had forgotten his papers. The husband immediately realized that his wife was not alone. As soon as he opened the front door, he heard moans and distinctive sounds echoing through the empty apartment. At first, he thought his wife was watching some interesting videos, but then he noticed men's clothes lying in a pile in the corner. He quickly burst into the room, where his wife was on all fours with her friend Ira behind her. Justin's anger clouded his eyes. Unable to think straight, he lunged at Costi. Terry squealed in horror and didn't even try to separate them. Finally, Justin, breathing heavily, let go of the battered guy. And then it was his wife's turn. Justin was screaming so hard, it seemed to shake the walls and rattle the glass in the window frames. Terry cowered in the corner and covered her head with her hands, crying as she waited for payback. Costi ran away as soon as the opportunity presented itself, and the woman was left alone with her furious husband. And then Justin grabbed her arm violently and dragged her toward the exit, haranguing her that she didn't yet know who she was messing with. He pushed Terry completely naked into the entryway, slamming the door in her face. Terry even stopped crying in shock. All her thoughts were occupied with only one thing. What to do now? Where to run to? As luck would have it, she heard an elevator come to their floor and open. Her son Ira and the neighbor across the hall got out. Such shame Terry had never experienced before today and would never experience anything stronger. "Mother?" Ira exclaimed in surprise. The woman cried again. The son quickly took off his jacket and threw it over his mother's shoulders, opening the door with his keys. The first thing he saw was his father piling all of his mother's things into a large garbage bag. "Be glad your son saved you. You'd still be standing there naked." He shouted to his wife and cursed folly. Ira asked him to tell him what was going on, and the father, unsparingly detailed, told his son what he had just seen and who his mother was now. Ira looked at his mother with a sad look and said he would be back later. He left. Terry was alone again with her husband. This time Justin didn't throw at her, he didn't yell. He just silently shoveled her things off the shelves and into a bag. Throwing it out the door, he said, "Get out." Terry left. She had some savings for the first time, so she got herself a room at a cheap hotel. Costi called her, urging her to come see him, but she blocked his number. She couldn't afford to live with a 20-year-old boy at 45. Terry had to get a job, because now she had no one to help her. Even her son turned his back on her. The work was hard, and Terry was tired from the beginning. Later, she met a man who seemed very nice. True, it later turned out that the police were looking for him. And Terry was dragged through offices for a long time, asking the same questions, which she could not answer because he told her something completely different. This situation finally undermined her, and Terry began to drown out her grief with alcohol. Thus, from a good mother and up to the time a decent wife, she descended to a woman who cannot even be called a kind word. Her friends tried to save her, but they too later turned away. Justin thought that the betrayal of his wife could not survive. But friends introduced him to a woman who slowly melted the ice in his heart. He was able to believe in love again, despite what his ex-wife had done to him. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think of this situation and the behavior of the characters.